16-year-old Zoe Washington stands trembling at the front of the crowded airplane, tears streaming down her face as flight attendant Heather loudly accuses her of lying. Zoe unzips her backpack slowly, pulling out something that causes the entire cabin to fall silent. The evidence that will change everything. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt unfairly judged based on appearances. Get ready for a journey that will make you question everything about how we treat each other in public spaces. Zoe Washington had always been exceptional. At 16, she possessed the kind of brilliance that teachers spoke about in hushed, reverent tones during faculty meetings. Her bedroom walls were lined not with posters of celebrities, but with schematics she'd drawn herself. Intricate designs of aircraft components and propulsion systems that even seasoned engineers would find impressive. A junior at Benjamin Franklin High School in Philadelphia, Zoe had recently shocked everyone by winning the National Young Innovators Competition with her revolutionary design for improving aircraft safety systems during turbulence. Her single mother, Vanessa Washington, had sacrificed everything to nurture her daughter's remarkable talent. Working 2 jobs, days as an administrative assistant at a local community college and evenings waiting tables at an upscale restaurant, Vanessa somehow still found time to drive Zoe to science fairs, engineering workshops, and university lectures. Their modest 2-bedroom apartment in West Philadelphia was filled with Zoe's trophies, certificates, and prototype models built from whatever materials they could afford. "We might not have much," Vanessa often told Zoe, while helping her with late-night project assemblies. "But dreams don't know bank balances." Those dreams had finally materialized into something extraordinary. An acceptance letter from NASA's Elite Student Advancement Program in Houston. A prestigious 6-week summer immersion for the nation's most promising young minds in aerospace. Only 12 students nationwide had been selected. The program included mentorship from actual NASA engineers, access to facilities normally restricted to all but top clearance personnel, and potential fast-track opportunities for future internships and college scholarships. The significance of this opportunity wasn't lost on either of them. Zoe would be the first Black student from her school ever selected for the program. When the acceptance email arrived, Vanessa had screamed so loudly that their downstairs neighbor had banged on the ceiling with a broom handle. "You did it, baby! You actually did it!" Vanessa had twirled her daughter around their small living room, both of them laughing and crying simultaneously. But the celebration had quickly been tempered by subtle microaggressions that appeared almost immediately. When Zoe proudly shared the news with her physics teacher, Mr. Lawson, his response had been a raised eyebrow and, "Well, I suppose NASA is really focusing on diversity these days." In the hallway, she overheard Amber Prescott, whose father was an airline executive, whisper to friends, "My dad says those special programs always have quotas to fill. You know what I mean." Each comment stung, but Zoe refused to let them dim her light. She'd earned this opportunity through years of dedicated work, countless nights studying while her peers were at parties, and an undeniable gift for engineering innovation. As the departure date approached, a painful reality set in. Vanessa couldn't accompany Zoe to Houston. Taking unpaid time off from either job would mean falling behind on rent, and the airline ticket alone would cost nearly a month's worth of groceries. "I'll be fine, Mom," Zoe had assured her, though her stomach knotted at the thought of traveling alone. "I'm practically an adult anyway." "You call me the minute you land," Vanessa had insisted, trying to hide her own anxiety. "And when you get to the dormitory, and before you go to sleep." The morning of the flight, Vanessa had woken up early to make Zoe's favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with whipped cream smiley faces, a tradition from her childhood. As they ate, Vanessa had given her daughter the same talk she'd been giving her since kindergarten. "Remember?" "I know, Mom." Zoe had finished the familiar phrase. "I have to be twice as good to get half as far. And always stay calm, even when I have every right not to be." Vanessa had nodded, her eyes glistening. "The world isn't fair, baby, but you're going to change it, one invention at a time." At Philadelphia International Airport, Vanessa had walked Zoe as far as security would allow. Their goodbye hug had lasted so long that people had started walking around them. "Make me proud," Vanessa had whispered. "I already did," Zoe had replied with a confident smile that masked her nervousness. That confidence had quickly been tested. At the TSA checkpoint, Zoe was pulled aside for random additional screening while watching several white travelers pass through without a second glance. The agent had rifled through her carefully packed carry-on, disrupting the organization system she'd spent an hour perfecting that morning. At the gate, the boarding agent had frowned at her ticket and asked twice if she was sure she was in the right place, despite the clearly printed gate number. When Zoe joined the line for her boarding group, an older woman had tapped her shoulder. "Honey, they haven't called general boarding yet," she'd said, despite Zoe standing in the clearly marked Group B line with her Group B ticket displayed on her phone. Each interaction added a pebble to the growing weight in Zoe's stomach, but she maintained her composure, remembering her mother's words. This opportunity was too important to jeopardize by showing any reaction that could be labeled as difficult or having an attitude. When she finally boarded the plane bound for Houston, Zoe felt a surge of excitement pushing past the discomfort. She found her window seat, 14, and settled in, immediately texting her mother that she was safely on board. After stowing her phone, she pulled out the aerospace engineering textbook she'd borrowed from the library, along with a notebook already half filled with her own equations and sketches. A middle-aged white couple, later introducing themselves as Richard and Martha Henderson, settled into seats 14B and 14C beside her. Mr. Henderson, noticing her textbook, had smiled warmly. "Bit of heavy reading for a flight?" he'd commented kindly. "It's actually light reading for me," Zoe had replied with a small, proud smile, allowing herself a moment of self-acknowledgement. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Zoe gazed out the window at the terminal, watching the ground crew scurrying about. She placed her hand on her backpack, feeling the outline of her NASA acceptance letter in its special folder. Despite everything, in that moment, she felt unstoppable. Houston and her future awaited. The first hour of the flight passed uneventfully. Zoe had immersed herself in her textbook, occasionally making notes in the margins or sketching improved designs on her notepad. The seatbelt sign had been turned off, and the flight attendants had begun their beverage service, pushing carts down the narrow aisles. That's when Zoe first noticed something odd. The flight attendant serving their section, her name tag read Heather, was interacting differently with various passengers. With the white businessman across the aisle, she was all smiles, asking twice if his ginger ale needed more ice. With the older white woman in front of Zoe, she leaned down to chat briefly about the weather in Houston. But when the beverage cart reached Zoe's row, Heather's demeanor shifted subtly. "What would you like?" she asked Mr. Henderson with a professional smile. "Coffee, black, please," he replied. "And for you, ma'am?" Heather turned to Mrs. Henderson. "Just water with lemon, thank you, dear." When it was Zoe's turn, she politely requested, "May I have some water, please?" Heather's eyes flickered briefly over Zoe, then moved on without serving her or acknowledging her request. Zoe, thinking perhaps the attendant hadn't heard her, waited patiently. But Heather continued down the aisle, serving the passengers behind them. "Excuse me?" Zoe called softly, raising her hand slightly. "I asked for water, please." Heather continued as if she hadn't heard, though she was barely 3 feet away. Mr. Henderson, noticing the interaction, frowned slightly. "Miss," he called, his voice carrying more authority than Zoe's. "I believe this young lady asked for water." Heather turned, her expression professionally neutral. "I'll come back with water for the entire row," she said dismissively, before continuing down the aisle. 15 minutes passed. Heather returned with another flight attendant, distributing pretzels, but no water for Zoe. Mrs. Henderson, noticing Zoe's empty tray table, shared a look with her husband. "Would you like some of my water, dear?" she offered kindly. "No, thank you. That's very nice. But I'm sure she'll come back," Zoe replied, not wanting to make a fuss. Mr. Henderson studied Zoe's textbook with genuine interest. Aerospace engineering? That's impressive. I was a mechanical engineer for 40 years before retiring. What interests you most about aerospace? Zoe's face lit up, grateful for the distraction. I'm particularly interested in safety systems. I've been working on a design that could help aircraft better stabilize during turbulence by using predictive algorithms and adaptive wing configurations. Mr. Henderson's eyebrows rose in surprise and respect. That's not just graduate-level thinking, that's cutting-edge research territory. Are you heading to Houston for a special program? Yes, sir. NASA's Elite Student Advancement Program. I just found out I was accepted last month. Well, I'll be. Mr. Henderson smiled broadly. That's one of the most prestigious programs in the country. You must be extraordinarily talented. As Zoe began explaining more about her research, the captain's voice came over the intercom announcing they were approaching some turbulence. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft ding. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts, the captain advised. Flight attendants, please suspend service and secure the cabin. Heather, who had finally returned with Zoe's water, hastily placed it on her tray table before hurrying back to her station. Just as Zoe reached for the cup, the plane dipped suddenly. The water tipped over, spilling across her tray and splashing onto the special folder containing her NASA acceptance letter that she had placed on her lap while chatting with Mr. Henderson. "Oh no!" Zoe gasped, quickly grabbing the folder and opening it to check the damage. The official NASA letterhead was now stained with water, the ink beginning to run in places. This wasn't just any document. It was the physical proof of her achievement, something she'd planned to frame one day. Panicked, Zoe grabbed the cocktail napkins from her tray and began blotting the paper, trying desperately to salvage it. Mrs. Henderson offered her unused napkins as well, but the damage was spreading. Within moments, Heather appeared in the aisle, her expression stern. "What's going on here?" she demanded, surveying the wet tray table and floor. "The turbulence caused her water to spill," Mrs. Henderson explained. "The water you just brought her." "I didn't cause this mess," Zoe added quickly, still trying to save her letter. "It was the turbulence, and now my NASA acceptance letter is ruined." Heather's expression shifted from stern to skeptical. "NASA letter? Right." Her tone made it clear she didn't believe Zoe. "In any case, you've created quite a mess here." "But I didn't," Zoe began. "It's not her fault," Mr. Henderson interjected. "We hit turbulence right after you served the water." Another flight attendant, a tall man whose name tag read Brad, approached. "What's the situation, Heather?" Before anyone else could speak, Heather replied, "This passenger spilled her drink and is now claiming it wasn't her fault." "It wasn't," Zoe insisted, feeling her heart rate increasing. "The turbulence. We need to keep the aisle clear," Brad interrupted, not even looking at Zoe. "Heather, get some towels for this mess." "My NASA letter is ruined," Zoe repeated, holding up the damp paper with its prestigious letterhead still visible. Brad glanced at it dismissively. "We'll handle the cleanup. Please stow your items and secure your tray table until the seatbelt sign is turned off." "But you don't understand," Zoe persisted, her voice rising slightly with frustration. "This is my acceptance to a special program. It's important." "Young lady," Brad said firmly, "I need you to follow instructions and stop disrupting other passengers." Zoe looked around, suddenly aware that several passengers were watching the interaction. Some had their phones out, recording the scene. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. "She's not disrupting anyone," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice carrying surprising authority for her small frame. "The turbulence caused her water to spill on an important document. Anyone can see that's what happened." Brad straightened his uniform jacket. "Ma'am, we have procedures to follow. I'll need everyone to remain seated with their seatbelts fastened." As the flight attendants moved away to get cleaning supplies, Zoe sat rigidly in her seat, the damp NASA letter carefully placed back in its folder. She could feel tears threatening but held them back, unwilling to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "Don't let them get to you," Mr. Henderson whispered kindly. "Some people just can't recognize extraordinary when it's sitting right next to them." But Zoe could feel the weight of stares from around the cabin. What should have been an exciting journey to her dream opportunity was quickly becoming a nightmare, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Can you imagine being publicly humiliated on a crowded airplane simply because of the color of your skin? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you've ever witnessed discrimination in public transportation. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of their appearance. What would you do if you were in Zoe's situation? Stay tuned to see how this shocking situation escalates and who steps up to help our brilliant young engineer. The tension in the cabin was palpable as Heather returned with paper towels, making a show of cleaning up what was, in reality, a small water spill. The seatbelt sign had turned off, but the atmosphere around row 14 remained charged with unspoken accusations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Heather's voice suddenly came over the intercom. "We'd like to remind you to keep your personal belongings secure at all times. We've had reports of suspicious activity on this flight. Please be vigilant and report anything unusual to the flight crew." As she made this announcement, her eyes pointedly drifted toward Zoe. The implication wasn't subtle. Several passengers glanced in Zoe's direction, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright suspicion. Others looked uncomfortable, sensing the unfairness of the situation but unwilling to intervene. Zoe's chest tightened. She recognized what was happening because it wasn't the first time. Throughout her life, she'd endured being followed in stores, having people clutch their bags tighter when she passed, and fielding surprised reactions when people discovered her academic achievements. But this felt different, more public, more threatening, with no escape possible at 30,000 feet. Inside, Zoe was seething. The injustice of being labeled suspicious for simply existing in this space made her want to stand up and shout the truth. But her mother's words echoed in her mind. "The world isn't fair, but showing anger will only make them think they were right about you." This was the impossible balance Vanessa had taught her daughter from an early age. The burden of maintaining composure even when facing blatant injustice. The memory of one particular conversation flooded back to Zoe. She had been 12, returning from a regional science fair where she'd won first place. A security guard had stopped them in the parking lot, demanding to see the contents of Zoe's bag, suggesting someone had reported a young person matching her description, taking items from the display tables. After proving her innocence, Vanessa had gripped the steering wheel of their old Honda so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Listen to me," she'd said, her voice steady but eyes blazing. "You will encounter this again and again. You have to be twice as good to get half as far, and when they try to provoke you, you cannot give them what they're looking for. An angry black girl is exactly what they expect. Don't let them write that story for you." Now, sitting on this flight to what should have been her brightest opportunity, Zoe felt the weight of those expectations crushing her. She folded her hands in her lap to stop them from shaking, either from anger or fear. She wasn't sure which emotion was winning. Brad appeared at the end of their row, his stance wide and authoritative. "Miss, we need to check your backpack," he announced loudly enough for nearby rows to hear. "Why?" Zoe asked, keeping her voice deliberately calm. "We've had reports of missing items, and we need to conduct a security check," Brad replied. "What items? Who reported this?" Mr. Henderson demanded, his engineering textbook now closed on his lap. "Sir, I'm not at liberty to discuss security matters with passengers," Brad replied curtly. Zoe took a deep breath. "I haven't taken anything that doesn't belong to me. My backpack contains my personal items for an educational program." "Then you shouldn't have any problem letting us check," Brad countered. "I know my rights," Zoe responded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You can't search my belongings without reasonable suspicion. Being black isn't reasonable suspicion." Brad's face hardened. "No one said anything about your race, young lady. This is about airline security." A new face appeared behind Brad, an older man with gray hair and a flight purser's uniform. His name tag read Calvin. His presence should have been reassuring, an authority figure who might bring reason to the situation. Instead, his expression mirrored Brad's suspicion. "What seems to be the problem here?" Calvin asked, though his tone suggested he'd already decided where the problem lay. "This passenger is refusing a routine security check," Brad explained. "It's not routine if you're only checking me," Zoe pointed out. trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Calvin's eyes narrowed slightly. "Young lady, interfering with flight crew duties is a federal offense. I suggest you cooperate." Zoe reached for her phone, desperate to call her mother, but the no service indicator mocked her from the screen. She was completely alone in this battle. From across the aisle, a young white businessman in a crisp suit, later introducing himself as Tyler Bennett, had been watching the entire interaction with growing concern. Discreetly, he positioned his phone on his tray table, angled to record the scene unfolding. "If you don't comply," Calvin continued, "we'll have no choice but to have security meet this aircraft upon landing." The word security sent a jolt of panic through Zoe. She'd seen the news stories. Black passengers removed from flights for reading, for speaking their native language, for simply asking questions. Once labeled a security threat, the consequences could follow her forever, potentially jeopardizing her NASA opportunity and future career. Mrs. Henderson attempted to intervene. "This is absurd. My husband and I have been sitting with this young woman the entire flight. She's a brilliant engineering student heading to a NASA program. She hasn't done anything wrong." "Ma'am, please stay out of this," Calvin responded dismissively. "This is an airline security matter." "It's discrimination is what it is," Mrs. Henderson retorted, her voice rising. Calvin's expression hardened. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you once to lower your voice and not interfere with crew duties." Mrs. Henderson, cowed by the authoritative tone, fell silent but remained visibly upset. Zoe felt the walls closing in. Passengers were staring openly now. Some had their phones out, recording the unfolding drama. She could imagine the social media posts already, context stripped away, judgments formed based on 10-second clips. "I need you to stand up and bring your backpack to the front galley for inspection," Calvin instructed. With shaking legs, Zoe stood. The humiliation burned through her as she lifted her backpack from under the seat. Every step down the aisle felt like walking a gauntlet as dozens of pairs of eyes tracked her movement. "This is what they want," she reminded herself silently. "To make you look guilty. Don't give them that power." But as she reached the front galley, standing under the harsh fluorescent lights with 3 white flight attendants surrounding her, power felt like something that had been stripped from her entirely. She was no longer Zoe Washington, brilliant engineering student and NASA program selectee. She was just another black body deemed suspicious, dangerous, out of place. And the worst part? Despite everything her mother had taught her about staying strong in these moments, despite her own determination not to break, Zoe could feel tears beginning to form at the corners of her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the pure, burning unfairness of it all. The front galley of the aircraft felt like a stage, with Zoe unwillingly cast as the main performer in a public humiliation. Calvin stood with his arms crossed while Brad hovered nearby. Heather unzipped Zoe's backpack without permission and began emptying its contents onto the small counter typically used for preparing drinks and snacks. One by one, Zoe's carefully packed possessions were exposed to the scrutinizing gaze of the flight crew and the many passengers who had abandoned any pretense of not watching. Her clothing for the 6-week program tumbled out first, neatly folded t-shirts, jeans, and the one semi-formal outfit her mother had splurged on for special occasions at NASA. Next came her toiletries bag, followed by the engineering textbooks she'd borrowed from the library. Each item seemed to puzzle the flight attendants, as if they had expected to find stolen goods instead of the normal belongings of an ambitious student. Then came items more personal. A small photo album containing pictures of Zoe and her mother at various science competitions, a handmade bracelet her mother had given her for luck, and worst of all, her journal. The leather-bound notebook contained not just her engineering ideas, but her private thoughts, fears, and dreams. Heather flipped it open, scanning the pages with raised eyebrows. "That's private," Zoe protested, reaching for the journal. Brad intercepted her hand. "We need to be thorough." Her NASA materials came next. Folders containing her acceptance letter, still damp from the water spill, program information, campus maps, and the research papers she'd prepared to discuss with her future mentors. Calvin picked up one of her research documents, skimming it with obvious skepticism. "You wrote this?" he asked, doubt evident in his tone. "Yes," Zoe replied, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. "It's my turbulence mitigation design." Calvin exchanged a look with Heather that clearly communicated disbelief. Throughout the cabin, passengers had different reactions to the unfolding scene. Some, particularly those seated at the back who couldn't see clearly, seemed to be enjoying the in-flight entertainment. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing the injustice but unwilling to involve themselves. A few looked genuinely distressed, whispering to their seatmates with concerned expressions. As the last items were removed from her backpack, exposing the empty interior, Zoe found her voice again. The humiliation had pushed her to a breaking point. "Why aren't you searching anyone else's bags?" she asked, her voice carrying through the quiet cabin. "There are at least 20 people on this plane with backpacks exactly like mine." Calvin's expression hardened. "We're following standard security procedures." "No, you're not," Zoe countered, her mother's warnings temporarily forgotten in the face of such blatant injustice. "Standard procedure would mean random checks or checking everyone. You're only checking me, and we all know why." "I suggest you watch your tone, young lady," Brad warned. "My tone?" Zoe's voice rose slightly. "You've humiliated me in front of an entire plane for no reason. You've gone through my private journal. You've treated me like a criminal when all I did was have a water spill during turbulence. Water that your colleagues served me." A murmur ran through the watching passengers. Zoe could sense the mood shifting slightly, with more people appearing uncertain about what they were witnessing. Calvin leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Making accusations of discrimination is a serious matter. We're simply doing our jobs." "Your job is to treat all passengers with respect," Zoe responded, finding strength in speaking the truth. At that moment, Heather, who had been rummaging through a side pocket of the backpack, straightened up with a triumphant expression. Between her fingers, she held a pair of expensive wireless earbuds. "What do we have here?" she asked loudly, ensuring the cabin could hear. Zoe stared at the earbuds in confusion. "Those aren't mine. I've never seen those before." "Really?" Heather's tone was dripping with sarcasm. "Because Mr. Patterson in first class reported his earbuds missing about an hour ago. They look exactly like these." "They're not mine," Zoe repeated, her mind racing. "I don't own wireless earbuds. I can't afford them." A memory suddenly flashed through her mind. Heather briefly handling her unattended backpack earlier when Zoe had gone to the lavatory. It had seemed innocent at the time, just a flight attendant moving a bag slightly to clear the aisle. Now, the implications were horrifying. "Ladies and gentlemen," Calvin announced, addressing the cabin, "we have recovered stolen property. The situation is under control." "I didn't steal anything," Zoe protested, her voice cracking. "Someone planted those. I never touched them." "So now you're accusing our crew of planting evidence?" Brad asked incredulously. "That's a very serious allegation." "It's the truth," Zoe insisted, tears now flowing freely despite her best efforts to contain them. "Why would I steal earbuds when I'm on my way to a NASA program that could determine my entire future?" Calvin shook his head with exaggerated disappointment. "Continuing to lie only makes your situation worse. We will be detaining you upon landing for theft of personal property." The word detaining hit Zoe like a physical blow. Detention could mean missing the program orientation. It could mean NASA rescinding her acceptance once they heard about the incident. Everything she'd worked for, all the late nights studying, all her mother's sacrifices, all her dreams of breaking barriers in aerospace engineering, seemed to be crumbling before her eyes. She couldn't hold back the sob that escaped her throat. "Please," she begged, hating how weak she sounded but desperate to salvage her future. "Please don't do this. I didn't take anything. This is my whole future." The passengers watched in uncomfortable silence as the 16-year-old girl broke down in tears at the front of the plane. Some looked away, unable to bear witnessing such raw distress. Others continued recording, their phones capturing her moment of complete vulnerability. Tyler, the businessman who had been recording discreetly, stood up and approached the galley. "Excuse me," he said firmly. I've been recording this interaction, and I think you should know that your treatment of this young woman appears highly questionable. Calvin's expression darkened. Recording crew members without permission is against airline policy. So is discriminatory treatment of passengers, Tyler countered, holding up his phone. I have footage of this entire incident. Heather stepped forward. Let me see that recording. Tyler pulled his phone back. The recording starts after the alleged theft would have occurred. It doesn't show everything that happened before. Exactly. Brad seized on this point. Your partial recording doesn't show the full story. This passenger was found in possession of stolen property. Property that mysteriously appeared after your colleague handled her bag, Tyler pointed out. Calvin straightened his uniform jacket. Sir, please return to your seat. We'll handle this situation according to airline protocols. This passenger will be met by airport security upon landing, and they can sort out the details. Tyler hesitated, looking at Zoe's tear-streaked face, then reluctantly returned to his seat when Brad physically positioned himself to block the galley. Zoe stood amidst her scattered belongings, feeling utterly defeated. The NASA letter lay on the counter, water-stained and now seemingly useless. Her future, which had seemed so bright just hours ago, now appeared to be slipping through her fingers like sand. All because she had dared to travel while black, to dream while black, to exist while black, in a space where some believed she didn't belong. As Calvin instructed her to gather her belongings and return to her seat, Zoe's hands trembled so badly she could barely repack her backpack. The message was clear. Her accomplishments, her brilliance, her humanity were all secondary to the color of her skin in the eyes of those who held power over her in this confined space. For the first time in her life, Zoe Washington wondered if her mother's strategy of exceptional achievement as armor against racism was fatally flawed. No amount of NASA acceptance letters could protect her from people determined to see her as something she wasn't. The walk back to her seat felt interminable. Zoe clutched her hastily repacked backpack against her chest like a shield, eyes downcast to avoid the stares of other passengers. Her cheeks burned with humiliation, and each step required conscious effort as her legs threatened to give way beneath her. As she approached row 14, Mrs. Henderson suddenly stood up, blocking the aisle. The elderly woman was barely 5 feet tall, but in that moment, she seemed to grow several inches through sheer force of will. This has gone far enough, she announced in a clear, carrying voice that belied her age and small stature. Martha, Mr. Henderson cautioned, tugging gently at his wife's sleeve while glancing nervously at the flight attendants. But Martha Henderson shook off his hand. No, Richard. I've sat quietly through too many injustices in my lifetime. I won't do it anymore. She turned to address the other passengers, many of whom were now openly watching. This young woman is being persecuted for absolutely nothing. She's a brilliant student on her way to NASA. NASA! And she's being treated like a criminal because of the color of her skin. Calvin, who had been following Zoe back to her seat, stepped forward. Ma'am, I must ask you to sit down immediately. I will not, Mrs. Henderson replied firmly. I taught elementary school for 43 years. I know what bullying looks like, and I know what racism looks like. This is both. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. A few passengers nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Some began to shift in their seats, the atmosphere changing from voyeuristic interest to something more complex. A woman in her early 40s with close-cropped hair and an air of quiet authority stood up from a few rows ahead. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, but carried herself with unmistakable confidence. I'm Dr. Jasmine Carter, she announced, her voice calm but authoritative. I'm a physician at Houston Methodist Hospital, and I've been observing this situation since it began. She moved to stand beside Zoe, placing a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. What's happening here is unacceptable by any professional standard. Doctor, Brad began condescendingly. This is an airline security matter. No, Dr. Carter interrupted firmly. This is a case of racial profiling, and I'm documenting it as such. She held up her phone, which was clearly recording. As a medical professional who frequently testifies in court, I can assure you my observations will be taken very seriously by both airline management and, if necessary, the courts. Tyler, the businessman who had tried to intervene earlier, had also risen from his seat. "I'm continuing to record as well," he called out, now making no attempt to hide his phone. "And I've been live streaming portions of this to my social media followers." Calvin's face reddened. "Recording crew members is against airline policy. I'm going to have to ask you to stop immediately and delete those recordings." "I don't think I will," Tyler replied calmly. "The public has a right to know how this airline treats its passengers." "This is interference with crew member duties," Brad announced loudly. "All passengers need to return to their seats immediately." As if on cue, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "This is your captain speaking. All passengers must return to their seats immediately. Any further disruption may result in an unscheduled landing at the nearest airport. This is for the safety of everyone on board." The threat of a diverted flight caused some passengers to glare at Zoe and her defenders, but others seemed even more troubled by the escalating situation. "I need to call my mother," Zoe said quietly to Dr. Carter. "But I don't have service." "Go to the bathroom," Dr. Carter whispered. "Try to connect to the in-flight Wi-Fi. You might be able to make a call that way." Zoe nodded and made her way to the rear lavatory, slipping inside and locking the door. Her hands shook as she tried to connect to the Wi-Fi, eventually managing to get a weak signal. She called her mother through a messaging app, praying the connection would hold. "Zoe!" Vanessa's voice came through, broken and staticky, but recognizable. "Are you in Houston already?" "Mom!" Zoe choked out, finally allowing herself to fully break down now that she was alone. Between sobs, she explained the nightmare unfolding on the flight. "Those bastards," Vanessa hissed, her protective fury evident even through the poor connection. "Listen to me carefully, Zoe. Don't sign anything. Don't admit to anything. Document everything. If they try to detain you, repeat these words. 'I do not consent to this detention, and I want to call my lawyer.'" "We don't have a lawyer, Mom," Zoe whispered. "Melissa does," Vanessa replied, referring to her college friend who practiced civil rights law. "I'm calling her right now, and I'm booking the next flight to Houston. I don't care what it costs." "Mom, we can't afford..." "Don't you worry about that. This is what credit cards are for. Now, is there anyone on that flight helping you?" Zoe described Dr. Carter, the Hendersons, and Tyler. "Good. Get their contact information if you can. Now dry those tears and hold your head high. You've done nothing wrong. I raised a fighter, remember?" "I remember," Zoe whispered, drawing strength from her mother's words. "I love you, baby. I'm coming." When Zoe emerged from the lavatory, she was shocked to find that her backpack, which she'd left at her seat, was now in Brad's possession at the front of the plane. "What are you doing with my bag?" she demanded, finding a new reservoir of courage after speaking with her mother. "All evidence is being secured until landing," Calvin informed her coldly. "Evidence?" Dr. Carter echoed incredulously. "This young woman's personal property is not evidence. Return her belongings immediately." "We'll be making an announcement shortly," Heather replied stiffly, avoiding eye contact. Sure enough, moments after Zoe returned to her seat, Calvin's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the disruption. For security reasons, we will be met by airport police upon arrival in Houston. We ask for your cooperation in remaining seated until authorities have boarded and addressed the situation." Zoe felt a fresh wave of panic. Police. The word carried terrifying implications for a young black woman in America. Dr. Carter must have sensed her fear because she immediately moved to the empty seat behind Zoe, leaning forward to speak softly. "Don't worry. We won't let them take you anywhere alone. I'm staying with you until your mother arrives." Mrs. Henderson reached across her husband to pat Zoe's hand. "We're not going anywhere either, dear." As the announcement settled over the cabin, an unexpected shift began to occur. What had started as a small group of allies expanded as more passengers began to recognize the injustice unfolding before them. A middle-aged black couple from first class came back to introduce themselves and offer support. A college student studying law handed Zoe a card with the number for a legal aid society. An off-duty pilot from another airline approached Calvin, speaking in low, urgent tones about professional standards and liability. What had begun as Zoe against the flight crew was transforming into something larger, a growing coalition of passengers unwilling to be complicit in an act of blatant discrimination. For the first time since the nightmare began, Zoe felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. Have you ever witnessed injustice and wondered if you should speak up? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you believe silence in the face of discrimination makes us complicit. Has a child's innocent perspective ever changed how you view a situation? Hit that like button if you've learned important life lessons from the honest observations of children. What do you think will happen when the plane lands? Will Zoe be vindicated? Or will the flight crew's false accusations prevail? Stay with us to discover the shocking truth that's about to be revealed by an unexpected source. 3 rows ahead of Zoe, 10-year-old Emily Parker had been documenting her very first airplane journey on her brand new birthday tablet. With her mother Laura's permission, she had been filming various aspects of the flight: the takeoff, the clouds outside her window, the beverage service, and her enthusiastic commentary about everything that caught her attention. "And here comes the nice lady with our drinks," Emily had narrated cheerfully as Heather approached their row earlier in the flight. "Mom says I can have apple juice but not soda because we're going to Grandma's and she doesn't want me to be too hyper when we get there." What Emily hadn't realized was that her wide-angle filming had captured more than just her excitement about apple juice. As Laura now reviewed the footage on her daughter's tablet, trying to distract the child from the tense situation developing in the cabin, she noticed something in the background of one clip that made her breath catch. There, clearly visible, was Heather pausing by Zoe's empty seat while the girl was in the bathroom. The flight attendant had glanced around furtively before quickly unzipping a side pocket of Zoe's backpack and slipping something inside. The entire action took less than 3 seconds, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it, but unmistakable when viewed in hindsight. Laura Parker stared at the tablet screen in disbelief, rewinding and replaying the clip several times to confirm what she'd seen. There was no ambiguity. The footage clearly showed Heather planting the earbuds that would later be discovered as evidence of theft. A moral dilemma immediately presented itself. Laura was a single mother traveling with her daughter to visit family in Houston. She had no connection to the unfolding drama and preferred to keep a low profile generally. Getting involved meant potential delays, possible legal entanglements, and exposing her daughter to conflict. But staying silent meant allowing a grave injustice to proceed, watching a young black woman potentially have her future destroyed by a false accusation. "Mom, why does that lady keep saying the girl stole something?" Emily asked innocently, having picked up on the commotion despite Laura's attempts to distract her. "The flight attendant put something in her bag. I saw her do it when I was filming. That's not fair." Laura looked at her daughter's earnest face, recognizing the simple moral clarity that adults sometimes lose in their complicated calculations of self-interest. "You're right, Em. It's not fair at all," she agreed softly. A memory surfaced. Laura herself at 19, witnessing a store security guard roughly detaining a black classmate for suspicious behavior when she'd done nothing wrong. Laura had said nothing then, had walked away telling herself it wasn't her business. She'd run into that same classmate years later and learned the incident had resulted in a criminal record that had affected her job prospects for years, all based on a false accusation. "I stayed quiet once before when I should have spoken up," Laura murmured, more to herself than to Emily. "I've regretted it ever since." With renewed determination, Laura unbuckled her seatbelt. "Stay here, sweetie. Mom needs to help someone." "Are you going to show them my video?" Emily asked. "So they know the truth?" "Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do." Laura made her way back through the cabin to where Zoe sat surrounded by her growing circle of allies. Leaning down, she spoke quietly to avoid being overheard by the flight attendants. "Excuse me, I'm Laura Parker. My daughter was filming her first flight experience, and she accidentally captured something you need to see." She handed the tablet to Zoe. The video queued up to the incriminating moment. Dr. Carter, the Hendersons, and Tyler gathered close to watch as the footage played. their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock, and then righteous anger. "That's definitive evidence," Dr. Carter whispered, her professional composure momentarily cracking. She planted the earbuds deliberately. "We need to strategize," Tyler said quietly. "The plane will be landing in about 40 minutes. Once we're on the ground, they'll try to rush this girl off with security before anyone can intervene." As the small group huddled together, planning their approach, Emily's voice piped up from the aisle. She had followed her mother despite instructions to stay seated. "Why did the lady put things in the girl's bag?" she asked loudly, her child's voice carrying through the suddenly quiet cabin. "That's like lying, and Mom says lying is always wrong." Nearby passengers turned to look, first at Emily, then at Heather, who was stationed at the rear galley. The flight attendant's face paled visibly. "What is she talking about?" a man in a business suit asked from across the aisle. "The flight attendant put those earphone things in her backpack when she wasn't looking," Emily explained with the straightforward honesty of a child. "I was making my airplane movie and I saw her do it." The murmur that spread through the cabin was like a wave, passengers turning to each other, repeating what the child had said, looking toward Heather with new suspicion. Calvin and Brad quickly converged at the back of the plane, engaged in an urgent, whispered conversation with Heather, who appeared to be denying something vehemently. More passengers began to openly record the situation on their phones, despite the earlier warnings against doing so. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted dramatically. What had begun as isolated support for Zoe was transforming into collective outrage. Calvin strode to the front of the cabin and made another announcement. "All recording devices must be turned off immediately. This is a direct instruction from your captain. Failure to comply could result in legal consequences upon landing." But his words had the opposite effect. More phones appeared. More passengers began speaking up. "You can't confiscate our phones," called out a woman in a business suit. "That's not within your authority." "I'm an attorney," added a middle-aged man near the front. "And what I'm witnessing appears to be a conspiracy to falsely accuse a passenger. I strongly advise the crew to reconsider their actions before this escalates further." Tyler, who had been quietly working on his phone, looked up with a satisfied smile. "Too late for damage control. This is going viral already. My live stream has over 2,000 viewers, and it's climbing by the second." Heather, visibly shaken, retreated to the rear galley. Brad attempted to maintain authority, walking through the cabin instructing people to put away their phones, but he was largely ignored. The pilot's voice came over the intercom again, this time with an edge of concern. "This is your captain. I've been informed of a disturbance in the cabin. If order is not restored immediately, I will divert this aircraft to the nearest airport. This is your final warning." Rather than intimidating passengers into compliance, the announcement seemed to galvanize them further. A gentleman in first class stood up, introducing himself as a retired judge, and loudly stated that he would be filing a formal complaint about the crew's conduct and would testify if necessary. Zoe, watching this remarkable shift unfold around her, felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication, relief, and lingering trauma from the humiliation she'd endured. Dr. Carter kept a protective arm around her shoulders, while Laura had retrieved her daughter and was now sitting in the empty seat across the aisle, the incriminating video safely backed up to multiple devices. "Your NASA dream is still alive," Mrs. Henderson assured Zoe quietly. "These people tried to take it from you, but truth has a way of coming to light." As the plane began its descent into Houston, the cabin had effectively divided into two camps: the increasingly isolated and defensive flight crew, and the unified passengers rallying around a young woman whose only crime had been to occupy space while black. The fasten seatbelt sign illuminated with a ding that seemed to underscore the tension. Through the windows, passengers could see police vehicles positioned on the tarmac, their lights flashing in the early evening sun. The sight sent a fresh wave of anxiety through Zoe. "Don't worry," Dr. Carter whispered. "We have the truth on our side now." But as the wheels touched down on Houston soil, Zoe couldn't help wondering if the truth would be enough. She'd seen enough of the world to know that justice wasn't always guaranteed, even with evidence in hand. As the plane taxied toward the gate, she took deep, measured breaths, preparing herself for whatever came next. The aircraft came to a complete stop at the gate, but the expected chime and announcement to unfasten seatbelts never came. Instead, Calvin's strained voice informed passengers, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We will be boarding security personnel before deplaning can begin." Through the windows, Zoe could see 4 police officers standing at the jet bridge entrance, along with what appeared to be an airline manager in a crisp suit and identification badge. Her heart hammered against her ribs despite the reassuring presence of her newfound allies. "Remember, we're all witnesses," Dr. Carter said firmly, addressing not just Zoe, but the surrounding passengers. "No one lets this young woman off this plane alone with security." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the cabin. Mr. Henderson, despite his earlier caution, now appeared resolute. "I've been silent too many times in my life when I should have spoken up. Not today." The main cabin door opened with a hydraulic hiss. Calvin immediately approached, speaking in hushed tones to the police officers and gesturing toward Zoe's row. The airline manager looked increasingly concerned as Calvin spoke, his brow furrowing deeper with each passing moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, the flight crew's strategy shifted dramatically. Brad approached Zoe's row, his demeanor suddenly solicitous. "Miss Washington, if you could please come with me to deplane first. We'd like to resolve this situation quickly and privately." "Absolutely not," Dr. Carter responded before Zoe could answer. "This young woman will not be separated from her witnesses." "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you," Brad replied, his forced smile slipping. "It concerns all of us," came a voice from behind. The retired judge from first class had made his way down the aisle. "I believe I speak for many passengers when I say we will not deplane until we're certain this young woman is treated fairly." Brad's face flushed red. "You can't refuse to deplane. That's entirely within our rights if we believe a crime is being committed," the judge interrupted calmly. "And falsely accusing a minor and attempting to isolate her from witnesses could certainly qualify." The standoff continued as more passengers unbuckled their seatbelts and stood in the aisle, forming what amounted to a protective barrier around Zoe. The message was clear: no one was going anywhere until justice was served. After several tense minutes, the cabin door reopened, and a new figure appeared. The captain himself, a middle-aged man with graying temples and an expression of barely contained anger. "What the hell is going on in my aircraft?" he demanded, addressing Calvin directly. "I've got a plane full of passengers refusing to deplane, police on my jet bridge, and dispatch telling me there's a social media firestorm about an incident on this flight." Calvin began explaining his version of events, characterizing Zoe as disruptive and uncooperative, claiming the earbuds had been found in her possession legitimately. Before he could finish, multiple passengers called out contradictions to his story. The captain's expression darkened further as he surveyed the cabin, clearly recognizing that the situation was far more complex than his crew had suggested. "Captain," Tyler called out, holding up his phone, "I have video documentation of what actually happened on this flight, and so do dozens of other passengers. Your crew has been engaging in racial profiling and evidence tampering." The airline manager, who had been waiting on the jet bridge, now stepped fully into the cabin, introducing himself as Robert Daniels, Customer Service Director for the airline's Houston operations. "I think we need to get to the bottom of this immediately," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to crisis management. "Captain, I suggest we move this discussion to the gate area, where we can review evidence properly." "I'm not leaving this plane without my backpack," Zoe stated firmly, finding courage in the support surrounding her. "And I'm not speaking to anyone without witnesses present." "Your backpack is being held as evidence," Calvin began. "Evidence of what exactly?" Laura interrupted, stepping forward with her daughter's tablet. "Of your flight attendant planting items in a passenger's bag? Because we have that on video." The cabin fell completely silent. Even the hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit seemed to pause in the heavy moment. "That's a very serious accusation," Robert Daniels said carefully. "It's not an accusation. It's documented fact," Laura replied, turning the tablet to show him. "My daughter was filming her first flight experience. She accidentally captured your flight attendant placing items in this young woman's bag while she was in the bathroom." The captain stepped forward to view the footage, his face darkening with each passing second. After watching the clip twice, he turned to Calvin with a thunderous expression. "Is this true?" he demanded. Calvin's composure finally cracked. "Sir, I wasn't aware of any. Heather acted on her own if this occurred. I was simply following protocol based on her report." From the rear galley, Heather called out, "That's a lie! You told me to make an example of her. You said we needed to maintain control of the cabin and that she was being uppity." Brad quickly tried to silence Heather, but the damage was done. The ugly word hung in the air, its racist connotations unmistakable. Robert Daniels pulled out his phone and stepped away to make a call, speaking urgently in hushed tones. The police officers, who had been observing from the doorway, now entered the cabin fully, but their approach seemed more measured than aggressive. The lead officer, an African-American woman with lieutenant stripes, addressed Zoe directly. "Miss, I understand there's been an incident on this flight. Would you be willing to show me the evidence you and these passengers are referring to?" Dr. Carter stepped forward. "Officer, I'm Dr. Jasmine Carter. I've been with this young woman throughout this ordeal. I believe you should see all the evidence, including the video showing the flight attendant planting items in her bag." The next 20 minutes unfolded in a surreal blur. Laura's video was shown to the police officers. Tyler's recordings were reviewed. Dozens of passengers provided statements. The airline manager was constantly on his phone, presumably reporting to higher executives as the situation deteriorated further. One revelation followed another. A quick check of the airline's records revealed 3 previous discrimination complaints filed against Calvin in the past year, all quietly resolved with minimal consequences. A first-class passenger confirmed he had never reported his earbuds missing. The entire premise of searching Zoe's bag had been fabricated. Throughout it all, Zoe remained composed, answering questions clearly and precisely. Her initial fear gradually replaced by a sense of validation as the truth emerged piece by piece. The NASA acceptance letter in her backpack, though water-damaged, served as tangible proof of her character and achievements. As the facts accumulated, the narrative constructed by the flight crew collapsed completely. What had begun as an attempt to humiliate and criminalize a young black woman had transformed into a damning indictment of institutional racism within the airline itself. With the police officers, airline manager, and captain now fully engaged in the investigation, the atmosphere on the plane had transformed from hostile to solemn. The passengers remained seated, many still recording, as Zoe was finally allowed to retrieve her backpack from where it had been stowed in the front galley. "I want everyone to see what's actually in my bag," Zoe announced, her voice steady and clear. "I want everyone to see who I really am." With deliberate movements, she placed her backpack on a seat at the front of the cabin where everyone could observe. The police lieutenant stood nearby, supervising as Zoe began to empty the contents herself, narrating as she went. The first item she removed was a clear plastic folder containing her NASA acceptance letter. Though water-stained from the earlier spill, the NASA letterhead and official signatures were clearly visible. "This is my acceptance to NASA's Elite Student Advancement Program," Zoe explained, holding it up for everyone to see. "Only 12 students nationwide were selected. I'm the first student from my school ever chosen." A ripple of impressed murmurs spread through the cabin. The airline manager, Robert Daniels, stepped closer to examine the document, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise. Next, Zoe pulled out a thick manila envelope containing her research papers. "These are my designs for an improved aircraft safety system that helps planes better navigate turbulence. My research won the National Young Innovators Competition last month." She carefully laid out several detailed technical diagrams alongside a 30-page research paper filled with complex equations and data analysis. The captain, himself a former aerospace engineering student before becoming a pilot, picked up one of the diagrams with visible interest. "This is graduate-level work," he remarked, scanning the equations. "You developed this yourself?" "Yes, sir," Zoe replied. "It uses predictive algorithms to anticipate air pocket formations and automatically adjusts wing configurations to minimize passenger impact." The captain looked at her with newfound respect. "I've seen prototype systems like this being developed by major aerospace companies. This is remarkable work." Zoe continued unpacking her backpack, revealing letters of recommendation from renowned scientists who had mentored her through online programs, each one more glowing than the last. One letter from Dr. William Chen, a leading aerodynamics expert at MIT, described Zoe as possibly the most naturally gifted young engineer I've encountered in 3 decades of teaching. The personal items came next. Her journal filled with not just engineering concepts, but also entries documenting her experiences as a young black woman pursuing a career in a field where people like her were severely underrepresented. Several entries detailed previous incidents of discrimination and how she had persevered despite them. "I've been keeping this journal since I was 12, Zoe explained. "It records every microaggression, every doubt cast on my abilities, every time someone suggested I got an opportunity because of diversity quotas rather than merit." She paused, her voice momentarily thick with emotion. "It also records every breakthrough, every problem I've solved, and every barrier I've broken." From a carefully padded side pocket, Zoe extracted a small device about the size of a cell phone with various sensors attached. "This is the prototype I built for my turbulence mitigation system. It's just a proof of concept, but it demonstrates how the algorithm would work in real conditions." One of the police officers, who had been watching silently, spoke up. "Wait, is that the adaptive wing configuration device that was in the science journal last month? My son did a report on it for his high school class." Zoe nodded, a small smile finally breaking through her serious demeanor. "Yes, sir, that's my design." The revelation seemed to shift something fundamental in the cabin. This wasn't just any passenger being mistreated. This was a genuine prodigy whose contributions could potentially save lives in the future. The injustice of what had transpired felt even more acute in light of what Zoe Washington represented. As the last items were removed from the backpack, the planted earbuds sat isolated on the seat, their presence now an obvious anomaly among Zoe's meticulously organized possessions. No one, not even Calvin, still maintained the fiction that they belonged to her. The airline manager was now on a conference call with what appeared to be several executives, based on his deferential tone. "Yes, sir, I understand the severity. Yes, the videos are indeed authentic." "No, sir, there's no question about what occurred. Yes, I believe immediate action is warranted." Meanwhile, Mr. Henderson had been engaged in his own phone call in hushed tones. As he ended the call, he approached Zoe with a gentle smile. "I just got off the phone with Dr. James Wilson," he said. "He's the program director for the NASA initiative you're joining." Zoe's eyes widened. "You know Dr. Wilson?" "We worked together at Boeing for 15 years before I retired," Mr. Henderson explained. "When you mentioned the program earlier, I thought the name sounded familiar. I took the liberty of calling him to explain what happened today." Is my place in the program in jeopardy?" Zoe asked, her voice small for the first time since the confrontation began. Mr. Henderson shook his head firmly. "Quite the opposite. Dr. Wilson is sending a NASA representative to meet you at the airport immediately. He said, and I quote, 'Any young woman with the brilliance to create that turbulence system and the courage to stand up to injustice is exactly who we want at NASA.'" Tears welled in Zoe's eyes, but these were different from the earlier ones. These were tears of relief and vindication. Dr. Carter squeezed her shoulder supportively. Suddenly, a commotion at the aircraft door drew everyone's attention. A woman burst into the cabin, her business attire rumpled and her expression frantic until her eyes landed on Zoe. "Mom!" Zoe cried, rushing toward Vanessa Washington. The reunion was emotional, mother and daughter clinging to each other as if they'd been separated for months rather than hours. Vanessa had somehow managed to book a last-minute flight from Philadelphia, arriving just as the situation was reaching its resolution. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Vanessa demanded. holding her daughter's face between her hands and examining her as if searching for physical wounds. "I'm okay now," Zoe assured her, gesturing to the group of supporters who had rallied around her. "These people helped me. They believed me." Vanessa looked around at the assembled allies: Dr. Carter, the Hendersons, Tyler, Laura, and Emily, and the dozens of passengers who had refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. Her expression conveyed a gratitude beyond words. Robert Daniels approached the reunited pair cautiously. "Ms. Washington, on behalf of the airline, I want to express our deepest—" "Save it!" Vanessa cut him off sharply. "Whatever you're about to say, it's not enough. My daughter was humiliated, accused of theft, and traumatized on your aircraft. This isn't over." "I understand your anger," Daniels acknowledged. "And you're right, a simple apology isn't sufficient. But I want you to know that the executives have authorized me to inform you that both Calvin and Heather have been terminated effective immediately. Brad is being suspended pending further investigation." "That's a start," Vanessa conceded. "But we're going to need more than that." As the conversation continued, passengers finally began to deplane, many pausing to offer Zoe words of encouragement or to share contact information in case she needed additional witnesses in the future. The solidarity that had formed in that metal tube at 30,000 feet wasn't dissolving upon landing. It was solidifying into something more permanent. Outside the aircraft windows, news vans could be seen pulling up near the terminal. Tyler's live stream and the viral videos from other passengers had already alerted local media to the story unfolding at the airport. What had begun as a personal nightmare for Zoe was rapidly transforming into a national conversation about racial profiling in commercial aviation. As Zoe repacked her backpack, now minus the planted earbuds, which had been taken as evidence, she paused to look around the nearly empty cabin. Just hours ago, she had boarded this plane filled with excitement about her future. That future had been threatened, nearly destroyed, but ultimately preserved by the courage of strangers who refused to be complicit in injustice. Despite everything, she was still going to NASA. Her dreams remained intact. And perhaps most importantly, she had discovered something her mother had always tried to teach her, that while racism was a painful reality, so too was the existence of allies willing to stand against it. 1 week later, Zoe Washington stood in the massive atrium of NASA's Johnson Space Center, surrounded by gleaming exhibits of spacecraft and the legacies of astronauts who had ventured beyond Earth's atmosphere. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating her face as she gazed up at a full-scale model of the International Space Station suspended from the ceiling. "Pretty amazing, isn't it?" asked Dr. James Wilson, the director of the Elite Student Advancement Program, as he guided Zoe and the 11 other selected students through the orientation tour. "It's better than I ever imagined," Zoe replied, her voice filled with genuine wonder. The past 7 days had been a whirlwind of activity and emotions following the incident on the flight. What had nearly been the worst day of her life had instead become a catalyst for unexpected positive change. The resolution at the airport had unfolded rapidly once the evidence became irrefutable. The airline's public apology had come within hours, not the typical corporate non-apology filled with passive voice and vague regrets, but a straightforward acknowledgement of racial profiling and evidence tampering by their employees. Calvin and Heather had indeed been terminated immediately. An internal investigation revealed that Calvin had a history of targeting minority passengers for random security checks, with complaints that had been repeatedly buried by middle management. Brad had been suspended initially, but further evidence of his complicity in previous incidents had led to his termination as well. The airline had announced a comprehensive anti-bias training program for all employees, developed in consultation with civil rights organizations. Flight crews would now undergo quarterly evaluations that included metrics on equitable treatment of passengers. Most surprisingly, the airline's CEO had personally called Vanessa Washington to offer not just compensation, but to request Zoe's input on their new training protocols. "We need perspectives like your daughter's if we're ever going to create real change," he had admitted. The media coverage had been intense, but largely supportive. Zoe's story had resonated with millions who had experienced similar treatment in public spaces. Her NASA credentials and brilliant engineering work had shattered stereotypes on national television, inspiring countless young people of color to see new possibilities for themselves in STEM fields. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome had been the connections formed during that fateful flight. Tyler's viral video had brought international attention to the issue of discrimination in air travel, sparking important conversations about implicit bias and bystander intervention. Dr. Carter had become a mentor figure for Zoe, offering guidance on navigating predominantly white professional spaces without compromising her identity. The respected physician had even arranged for Zoe to speak to her medical students about designing accessibility features for future spacecraft, a perfect intersection of their different fields. The Hendersons had gone beyond moral support. After learning about the financial sacrifices Vanessa had made to support her daughter's education, they had established a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in aerospace engineering. The Zoe Washington Pioneer Scholarship would provide financial assistance to 5 students annually. Laura and Emily Parker had formed an unexpected friendship with Zoe. Emily, inspired by Zoe's engineering prowess, had begun taking coding classes and building simple robots. "When I grow up, I want to build spaceships like Zoe," she had declared to her mother, who encouraged this newfound passion. Most touching of all, Vanessa Washington had received a job offer from NASA's Diversity and Inclusion Department, allowing her to relocate to Houston near her daughter. After years of working multiple jobs to support Zoe's dreams, Vanessa would now be part of the organization making those dreams possible. Today, all of these supporters had gathered at NASA for a special ceremony. Zoe's turbulence mitigation device, refined with help from NASA engineers during her first week in the program, was being recognized with a special commendation. The airline that had once humiliated her was now in discussions to test her technology on actual flights, a remarkable turn of events that still seemed surreal. As Zoe stepped up to the podium to address the assembled guests and a new group of young black girls from a local STEM program, she felt a sense of purpose greater than her individual achievement. "1 week ago, I was nearly prevented from standing where I am today," she began, her voice clear and confident. "1 week ago, I was reminded that no matter my achievements or capabilities, some people would see only the color of my skin and make judgments based on that alone." She paused, looking out at the faces watching her. Dr. Carter, the Hendersons, Tyler, Laura, and Emily, her fellow NASA program selectees, and most importantly, her mother, whose eyes shone with pride. "But something else happened that day too," Zoe continued. "Strangers became allies. People who could have remained silent chose to speak up. A little girl's honest recording revealed truth that adults tried to hide, and I learned that while injustice exists, so does the courage to confront it." Behind her, encased in a special display, was her backpack, the same one that had been searched and scrutinized on the flight. The Houston Science Museum had requested to display it temporarily as part of an exhibit on innovation and perseverance, alongside the prototype of her turbulence mitigation device. "This backpack contains more than just my inventions and research," Zoe said, gesturing toward the display. "It contains the lesson that our brilliance cannot be diminished by those who refuse to see it. It contains the truth that our dreams are valid, our contributions are valuable, and our presence in spaces like this is not just welcome, it's necessary." As her speech concluded to enthusiastic applause, Zoe knew that her journey was far from over. The following day, she would board another flight, this time as an honored guest in first class, to attend a national engineering conference where she'd been invited to present her research. The new flight crew would greet her with respect, unaware of the media storm she had generated. Fellow passengers might recognize her from news coverage, or they might see just another talented young woman pursuing her dreams. Either way, Zoe would board that plane differently than she had the first one. Not just with greater confidence in herself, but with a deeper understanding of both humanity's capacity for prejudice and its potential for solidarity. As the ceremony concluded and well-wishers surrounded her, Zoe opened her new backpack, a gift from her NASA mentors, revealing the schematics for her next-generation invention. The journey would continue, forever changed but unbowed. Standing in that temple of human achievement, where the boundaries of what's possible are constantly expanded, Zoe Washington had claimed her rightful place, not as an exception or a quota, but as a brilliant mind whose contributions would someday help carry humanity to the stars. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination like Zoe experienced? Would you have the courage to speak up like Laura, Dr. Carter, and the Hendersons? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message of perseverance and justice. Remember, change happens when good people refuse to remain silent in the face of injustice. Zoe's story teaches us powerful truths about courage and justice in modern America. First, racism doesn't disappear with achievement. Even NASA-bound prodigies face discrimination. Second, silence enables injustice, while speaking up creates ripples of positive change that extend far beyond a single incident. Third, evidence matters. Recording discriminatory actions transforms individual trauma into systemic accountability. Fourth, allies come in all forms, from elderly couples to young children with tablets, reminding us that confronting racism requires diverse voices united in purpose. Most importantly, Zoe's journey shows that while racism attempts to diminish Black excellence, it ultimately fails when faced with unshakable dignity and supportive community. Her backpack contained more than engineering brilliance. It carried the weight of representation and the power of perseverance. In standing her ground, Zoe not only preserved her own future, but created space for countless others who will follow in her footsteps toward the stars. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you had spoken up? Or perhaps you were the one brave soul who did. Share your experience in the comments below. What would you have done if you were on Zoe's flight? If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe for more powerful stories about overcoming injustice and breaking barriers. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that standing against racism creates real change. Thank you for joining me on this journey of courage and transformation. May we all find the strength to be like Emily, seeing injustice clearly and speaking truth without hesitation. Until next time, remember that your voice matters in creating the world we all deserve to live in.